Okay, welcome back. This is the hands-on portion where we're talking about security things. Basically, the best practices for security on domain controllers and basically how to harden your domain and your domain controller. So let's talk about the domain controller itself, the physical machine. So you really need physical security on this thing, right? I mean, you can't just have it sitting out in the hallway. I mean, it's going to have to be in a secure room, probably with a cipher lock, or nowadays a cipher lock with a video camera that records everybody going into the room. You know, clearly a restricted access. Most likely the custodial staff is not allowed in there at all, and no one goes in there who's not a member of the SA team without someone with a badge who's accompanying them. They even talk about considering having the domain controller in a separate rack, a 19-inch rack that is even more secure, like, over in the corner someplace that people don't ever go to. Keep it separate from all the other servers. Don't have like your domain controller and your database server in the same rack. Okay. And if you want to use a really cool feature, a very good idea is to use the BitLocker on all of the drives on your domain controller. So if anyone came and stole the system or pulled a drive or something, they would get nothing. Now, unfortunately, the rules for BitLocker are very weird. It has to be direct attached storage. Okay, you cannot use this on a SAN or a NAS configuration. It has to be directly connected, and it has to be a basic disk. Remember the basic and dynamic? The damn dynamic was like, making a fake, not fake, but making a software RAID kind of configuration, those kind of things. No, they don't like that. So domain controllers basically should you can get away with one or two disks. If you had hardware RAID, that's probably what I would do. Now, hardware RAID, I can go ahead and do BitLocker, but not software RAID. Okay, but direct attach is what's required. Okay, just saying. So if you have like a branch location, one of the things they talk about is having a read-only domain controller. And you think, well, what is the purpose for a read-only domain controller? First of all, read-only domain controllers are not read-only, so it's kind of a misnomer. Yes, it makes changes. It just doesn't store the changes. In fact, it doesn't store anything at all. The idea is, so most likely a branch location is going to have not top-level security, right? It's just going to be in a closet someplace, right? So if somebody broke in and stole the computer, it actually doesn't have any Active Directory database physically on the machine. It keeps it all just in memory. It wakes up and says, I don't have anything. Let me go to the real domain controller over the wire and pull all my database stuff, and I'll just cache it in memory. And if somebody kills the power, nothing gets stored on my hard drive. So that is completely safe. That's even safer than using BitLocker. Okay. So they talk about, the configuration, limit the remote desktop capability. I go along with that. You could have maybe one or two people. You could configure it by MAC address on the PC and by the user. In other words, I have to be in this chair sitting at that machine to be able to remote desktop into the server. Okay, I can't be anywhere else in the building, and it can't be anyone else other than me. Okay, patch the DCs in a separate cycle from the rest of the servers. That's a good idea. These things are just so valuable and so important that they get screwed up. Man, oh man. So just do them out of cycle. Disable all web browsers. You ought to not be first of all, you ought not be logging into the domain controller directly at all. I talked about the remote desktop, but most likely you can have all your RSAP tools located on your machine sitting in your queue, and so you just talk to the domain controller that way. You don't actually really log into it at all. Okay, and use the firewall to basically prevent somebody from have a browser connection to the internet. Basically, what you really want is no internet connection whatsoever. That's what you really want. That's not exactly practical, but that's what they want. Okay, then they talk about, Active Directory security assessment. There's a thing you can get. And they talk about the avenues of compromise. It could be, breach targets, like gaps in patching. That would make sense. Antivirus, outdated operating system or outdated software. If somebody had a copy of your infrastructure, database, they could tell exactly what machines had an old version of Adobe or an old version of this, or running some old machine that doesn't have this particular patch, right? That's very valuable stuff. And then those attractive accounts, you know, you're talking about browsing. Well, first of all, unsecured computers, you know, have them in a location like in the lobby. Ugh, that's horrible. Browsing with admin, I mean, no one should ever have a run as on a browser. Okay, that ought to be something just absolutely not allowed. And anything where you have common passwords that are shared among people, that's always horrible. They talk about reducing the attack surface. So, you know, privileged accounts and groups, you know, domain admins, those kind of things, right? You know, don't have an awful lot of those things exposed anywhere. The concept of least privilege. If it doesn't require administrator rights, then don't log in with an SA credentials, right? Log on with normal credentials and use run as every single time you need to do something, okay? Don't, for a moment, walk off and leave. Back in the day, 10 million years ago, we had a profile set up for our system administrator accounts that had blood red background on the screen. And that way, you know, normal background was whatever the thing came with, you know, the little blue logo with the window. But for the system, if you logged in with a system administrator account, which supposedly should be very, very rare, right? It would turn the background blood red, and that way you can instantly tell, oh my God, I logged in with a super user account. That's something I want to get out of really quick. In other words, it would be hard for you to go, oh wait, I need to go to the bathroom, and you walk up, you know, get up and leave that big red thing on the screen. You go, oh wait, let me log out first. Yeah, pretty cool trick. Anyway, back to the story. Monitoring the Active Directory for signs of compromise. Audit the logins. Now, I don't really want to audit all of the logins everywhere because that would be huge. But I could go in here to the default domain controllers policy, right? Because I'm only talking about the domain controllers. So I'm going to go down to here and let's look at the default domain controllers policy. Remember this guy, if I go in here to do an edit, this guy's got already a bunch of stuff in here. But one of the things we could do is talk about, let's go to computer configurations. Let's go to policies, Windows settings, security settings, and then local policies. Goodness. And then there's an audit policy. And I can go in here and say, I want to turn on two of these things. Account management, okay, that guy. Account management will tell me anytime someone was added or removed to a group, or, well, a new group was created, but added or removed to a group. So I could tell anytime somebody, like, added to the domain administrators group. I go, whoa, 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 what's this? And the other one is log on events, okay? Now, this is log on events to the physical machine, which, quite frankly, I just told you really ought not have any. I mean, in theory. No one should be remote desktoping into the domain controller. They ought to be using the RSAT tools sitting at your desk at your cube, you know, that's probably right next door to the server room. Okay, so those two events should be enabled. When you do that, you'll get, I'm not going to test you on this, but there's event numbers for adding or removing to a domain local group, another set of event numbers for adding or removing to a global, another one for universal groups, and then the other ones for log on and log off. So there's what, 8 different event numbers you would have to know, because when you're done this, you're going to have to go to the event log and then filter on those events to find out what's going on. Okay, planning for compromise. They talk about, you know, rethink your current approach of how you do things. For example, well, you know, we go into the server room and sit down at the chair and log into the domain controller to be able to, no, please don't. Okay, rethink how you're thinking. Make it from a business-centric point of view. Assign ownership to AD components. Like, for example, I'm going to go here to this particular, you know, who has the ability to change this guy? Okay, so we have this thing called delegation. It talks about who all the groups and views have specific permissions for this GPO. Maybe you ought to have it pulled down. Maybe you ought to have a GPO editors list or something. So not everyone in the entire admin group or domain admins have this. You know, thin it down some if you could. Best practices. Now, some of this stuff is fairly obvious. You know, patch your applications, patch your operating system. Come on, that's just simple stuff. Deploy and maintain antivirus, because antivirus by itself is not going to cut it. You need to have it constantly being updated, right? Monitor system sensitive AD objects like the administrator group privileges. That's like that audit guy. I turn on auditing and I say, I want to listen to everyone anytime anyone makes a change to any one of those groups. Monitor sensitive accounts. Yeah, particularly like login. Whoa, why is Bob logging into this machine? Limit privileged accounts use on unauthorized systems. In other words, you could configure it so that these machines that are out in the open, you know, a cube farm kind of a scenario where there's no doors or anything, you can't sit at one of those machines and do run as. Sorry, because it's a potentially compromised machine. Machines that have behind a door, yeah, you might be able to allow them, a door with a lock, you might be able to have those have RDP and have run as capability. Use temporary memberships. Now, this is something that you can't do from Active Directory alone. You have to pop out to PowerShell. But I could say, hey, Bob, I need your help, installing a bunch of PCs. So I'm going to give you permission to add a machine to the domain, and it's going to expire on Friday. Yes, you can't do it with just the stuff that we've got. But with PowerShell, you could give somebody temporary group membership with an expiration date. That's pretty doggone cool. Implement's called Secure Admin Host. Basically, we're talking about hardening the PC for the administrator. So I'm sitting in my office, hopefully with a door, you know, and then my machine is hardened more than the rest of the machines, okay? Secure Admin Host. You know, you could do a implement application allow list on those, particularly like the domain controller and the hardened host. That you just can't install software on these things, even though you're an administrator. You have godlike powers. I'm still going to say, I'm sorry, you can't install, Pac-Man on this thing. Just have an allow list of what they can and can't do. Identify the critical aspects. I mean, clearly, if you're looking at your stuff going, okay, that's important, same old, we've done all that before. Implement least privileges and role-based controls. Yep. Because your role is a backup operator, I'm going to have you be able to do backups and restores, but I'm not going to allow you to add computers, and I'm not going to allow you to add users, because that's not what you do. You only do backup and restore. Therefore, that is what you do. Okay, makes sense. Isolate or decommission legacy systems and legacy applications as soon as practical. Don't let them hang out there. If you have an old version of something, by God, at least pull it off on a separate machine someplace. Isolate it away from the rest of the system, and then get rid of it as fast as possible. And then obviously implement configuration management. Every single time you make a change to something, it ought to be recorded in a database. I added this, or I tweaked this, or I made this registry change. Yeah, that all ought to be done. Okay, you should also be able to do backup and restore of the entire thing. We did a demo where you go to the backup system and tell it, well, I want to restore the system state, which is the database for Active Directory. But in addition to that, I can back up each individual group policy object. One of the things that's really helpful, talking about the configuration, is to have some sort of documentation on what each one of these things does, right? And I want to be able to have it printed in a book somewhere, not online kind of a thing, but honest to God, physical documentation of here's how because an auditor comes out, they go, let me see how you got your GPOs. You go, oh, well, here's the book, Okay, so let me just show you how you do that. I'm just going to pick this one. I'm going to do a right click. And it basically says save report, okay? And then it's going to be an HTML report, so I'm just going to throw it on my desktop, and I'm going to hit the save button. And then after we come back from the 15-minute mark, I'll show you what it shows you what's in there.